Welcome back to GetRubix.com. I'm Steve Weiner, and today we're going to be talking about the start migrate PS1 script. That is the primary orchestrator script that runs our whole tenant-to-tenant migration process, and it's got a lot in it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over all the pieces that are going to be in it, high level, so we get an idea of what to expect, and then I'm going to take you through building the script from the ground up. We're going to go through and we're going to start on making the Azure app registration that we need to authenticate to the graph of tenant A, and we're going to start putting some basic pieces together to call info from there. And then we might do some more stuff eventually in other videos. So. Okay, so we're here on my desktop where we're going to be creating the script. We also have prepared a virtual machine set up in the state of the source machine in tenant A. So we're going to talk about this for a moment. So as far as the source machine goes, let's take a look. We can go to system Z0T7349. Let's go look that machine up. So this is our source tenant, right? We don't need the repo at the moment. As always, the link to the blog series about this and the GitHub repo will be, below here in the, however they make the comments or the info, whatever. I don't care. All right. So let's go to Windows devices. This is my Rubix dev tenant. So we can see this is the device that we just saw. So this will be our reference device for the source machine. So it's in tenant A, it's enrolled by Rick Jones, it's the primary user. So we know it's here. It's here. It should also be an Autopilot device. So we can confirm that by checking that serial number, 5608, devices, Windows enrollment, devices. I could see already, 5608. There's our device. So, okay, so this device is enrolled in tenant A. Azure AD join Intune manage. So let's go ahead and take a look at putting together the script that's going to run everything. I've made a folder on my desktop called migration. The first thing we're going to do is create a start migrate.ps1. I went ahead and created mine. I'm going to open it with Visual Studio Code. You can use whatever text editor you like. So why don't we go ahead and look at everything. I made some comments, right? And this was more for me not to forget. This is everything the script is going to be doing. So we're going to talk through it, and then we're going to actually do each one here. I always set the error action preference to silently continue. That works best for this. You can do what you want, but essentially we're going to set up local files and logging. That means we're going to set up a local place on tenant A, on the source machine in tenant A to unpack our task scripts that are going to run by themselves. So we need a local place to put them. We're also going to start a transcript, so we need a log file, a pre-migration log file on the machine so we can see what's going on. In the next step, we're going to authenticate to the graph using our Azure app registration. We're going to create that in this. We're going to create that in this video together. We're going to grab some current information about the device, the user, the folders we want to migrate, and we're going to store all that. We're going to set some required policy to make the migration happen. We're going to actually perform the user data migration. That's going to be an interesting piece. That's going to kind of take up most of this. You can see it has some subsections, right, where we're going to check for disk space and then actually execute the migration. We remove previous MDM enrollment artifacts, right, things left behind by being joined to tenant A because we don't want them present when we move to tenant B. We're actually going to leave tenant A, right, disconnect from Azure Intune on the machine, set our post-migration tests, join tenant B using a provisioning package. That's just the device at this point. We're going to then have the graph. We're going to go through the graph to delete objects from tenant A, and lastly, we're just going to do an automatic reboot on the device. So why don't we start getting into it? Let's start by step one, local files and logging. So what we're going to do is I like to do a local path. We're going to put everything in C program data Intune migration is what I'm going to call it. Just so I know what it is. It's good to be concise. So I'm told I'm not very concise, but yeah, it's important for this stuff. So if it's not there, we're going to put it there, basically. Very simple. We're going to use a make dir and just local path. So we know it won't be there, but it's good to check for it anyway. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is the idea, you got to remember, everything here is going to run from an Intune Win package, meaning it's going to be this script containing a bunch of other scripts with it that we're ultimately going to make, and I'm going to show you this in upcoming videos, but they all have to get put in that program data Intune migration. So we're going to have to do that. And this part I am going to drop in here. By the way, real quick, I want to mention the reason I'm typing all this out as opposed to just walking you through it already. And you could obviously go to the repo right now, find this and copy and paste it. But what I find really helpful when I'm learning a new platform or piece of code or new solution is to literally go through and type everything, explain it while I type. It helps me understand it better, makes things a lot easier because I'm way more familiar with these concepts when I go through later on and if I have to troubleshoot things like that. So I think it's good. Having said that, I am going to dump some of this in because there are a lot of files that end up here. Okay, so those files are in there now in the array. The idea is each one of these will be present in the package. If we've just skipped ahead now, it means I thought me typing it out was way too boring. So you're welcome. Now that we have the files in the array, we want to go ahead and put them in the local directory we made, right? The C program data Intune migration. So we're going to go ahead for each file in package files. So that'll tell the script to loop through each item individually, and we'll just copy that item. Copy item path. We're going to do PS script root, which means the directory that this script is sitting in. This is pretty helpful when you're dealing with a script running inside of an Intune package. If you see I'm being overly deliberate about things like the path switch after copy item, which technically you don't need, it's because Intune can be finicky sometimes. And if the assumption is we're running this from Intune, we want to be as explicit as possible. So PS script root and then the file name. Which is going to iterate through each name of the file, and the destination, of course, is going to be our local path. Force that. Great. And we'll add the verbose switch since we're gonna be logging everything. I didn't start the transcript there yet, though. That's okay. You know what, we could probably, let's do that first, actually. I'm going to change my mind. Let's do the transcript first now that we have the local directory. So let's go ahead and start the logging. Might as well, right? If we can. Makes sense. Let's go ahead and do that. Start transcript. Start transcript. Path. Local path. And we'll call this pre-migration.log. Verbose. Okay, so now we've started it. So now we can go ahead and we'll log that. So verbose there, and now we can add a little write host. Write hosts. Say copying item file to local path. Great. What we're also going to do here is we're going to set basically an install flag because this is an Intune Win package. Intune needs a way to detect that we've installed this. Because it's not an app, we're not really installing anything. We do have to make our own. So I usually make sets Intune install detection flag. Let's call it detection flag. Let's call it install flag. And it will be the local path and we'll call it installed. Be a text file, doesn't really matter. We'll set the item, new item. We'll do install flag, and then we're just going to give it some context so it's not 0 KB. Set contents. We'll say install flag value. We'll call it. We'll type the text package installed inside. That's really all we need. Okay, now we have an install flag. Great. Let's rope off that section. I like to do that. It makes things easier as I'm going through. Step 1 complete. Yeah, look at that. Okay, perfect. Okay, in step 2, we have to authenticate to the Microsoft Graph. So we're going to use an app registration for this. So what do we need to do an app registration? We need a client ID. We need a client secret. I don't have these values yet. We're going to make them together. And we need the name of our tenant. You should probably know that. Mine is Rubik's Dev. Oop. I'm leaving all these mistakes in here for you guys. You can see that. You know, just crank this stuff out. Great. RubiksDev.com. And I can write a little host here. Write host. Authenticating to tenant with Microsoft Graph. Yeah, why not? Make it look fancy. Okay, so how do we get these? So if I go back to my tenant, I don't want to be in Intune. I want to be in the Entra portal, formerly Azure Active Directory. You can do that by entra.microsoft.com. You sign in. I recommend using global administrator credentials for this because we are going to be making app registrations that we need to permission. So if you've never made an app reg before, this is a super simple version of it. Granted, in the future, if you need them to be more complex, there's a lot more to these, but we are using bare bones. We're making a principle that we need to access the information. So applications, app registrations, and I'm going to make a new registration. I'm going to call it tenant to tenant migration app reg. That's it. I'm not doing anything else here. I'm just going to hit register. Okay. Immediately, you can see I have an application or client ID, and I know we need that. So if I go back here, boom, we're good to go. I need a client secret. Well, what's the secret, right? So the secret is going to be, we have to make that. New client secret. When you click on certificates and secrets, I'm just going to call it secret. Tired of naming things, terrible with the names. I'm going to leave mine on the default. You can have it expire whenever you want. I'm not going to use this for more than for this this series. Actually, by the time you see this, the app reg won't be good anymore because obviously everyone will have access to my tenant. So this will be deleted. So you can see here that with the secret value, with the secret, you get a value and an ID. It's very important. You don't want the ID, and this is the only time you can grab this. If we navigate away from this page, you won't be able to get it again. They hide it, so you'd have to make a new one. So we're going to copy the value to the clipboard. We don't need the ID. We need the value of the secret, and we're going to place that in our client secret variable. So now we have the ID and the secret. Let's go ahead and just make sure. You can hover over here. Yep, ends in AWM. They're very strange, so it's good to check. Now that we have our secret set for this app registration, it has to be able to perform something, and it has no permissions to do anything. So let's go ahead and give it permissions. So we're going to need the following permissions for this to do what we want and perform the migration task. So I'm going to click Add Permission, Microsoft Graph, and Application Permissions. All right, so we're going to search the following. First thing we need is device read write all. Check that. Then we're going to go into the device management node. That's basically the Intune node. So there's a few things here. Device management configuration, read write all. Device management manage devices. We need privileged operations and read write all. And device management service config, read write all. Oh, apps. Skip that one. Reread all for the apps. Let's go ahead and add those permissions. Okay, you have to click grant consent. This is why you'll need the global admin role to do this. Okay, now we're free to put the information in the script so we can start using it. Okay, that's everything we need to do that. So what I'm going to do in the next part is I'm going to place basically a series of scripts to authenticate to the graph. These were done by the developer on our team. It's a really cool way to basically use our secret and client ID to authenticate and get a token so we can communicate with the graph without necessarily importing modules. So I'm going to dump that block in so it's here, and it'll be there for you as well, as opposed to us walking through that, because that's not really relevant to the tenant migration. Can't shed a lot of light on that. Okay, so we've dumped that part in. That's going to be this area here, where we're essentially just constructing an auth token out of our client secret and ID, and you can just drop that right in there. Okay, so next up, we have to get some information about the current device, the user on the device, and you got to understand this all has to be done in the system context because it's running from an Intune application. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to get these items? So for this, we're going to move over to our actual reference machine. Again, this is the machine that the app is going to run on. Now, in order to properly test the way Intune would deploy, you can't run PowerShell or the command prompt is elevated, because this is just running as administrator if you have administrator privileges. So that won't work. So what we have to do is I've downloaded PSTools, and I'll put the link to grab that. Right, PSTools allows you to run an app in the system context. So we're gonna do that now, right? And we're gonna run some of these commands and see how they take blocks of the code and see how they respond here. So I'm going to open command as an admin, but then I'm going to call that PSTools, psexec, is, and I'm going to open PowerShell. And once you agree to that, who am I? Now I'm NT authority system. So now we can assume I'm Intune, not the user. Let's go ahead and open up ICE so that we can test some of these things here. Okay, so from the share, that's the file we were working on. Let's open that up. That has everything we have so far. More importantly, it's got our app registration. So let's start by running that first part and seeing what happens. Yep. Okay, it looks like we missed a line when we were typing this out, so it's a good thing we ran that. Body equals grants type. That's why for this part I recommend just pasting it in. This is the one thing you do not want to bother learning. com/default. Okay, now we run it. Let's clear the screen. Beep, beep, beep. Okay, we are now authenticated to the graph. And don't worry, that is that line we missed is already in the repo. So we'll pass that. Anyway, okay. So we are authenticated, so we can make some basic calls. So why don't we go ahead and start by getting the serial number. So we're going to write host. Let's say we're just gathering device info. And then we will get the serial number. And for that, we'll just do a pretty simple call. We'll do serial number equals get WMI object. We will do, let's see here, get WMI object, class, win32 BIOS, select object, expand properties, serial number. Just run that line. That should give us the serial number. Let's just test that out. Boom, serial number for the device. So we can write that since we'll be logging. Write host, serial number number is serial number. Great. So how are we going to use that to get the Autopilot and Intune info? So let's start by getting the Autopilot info. So what we need to do is we need to use the serial number to query the graph for that. So the first thing we need to do is get the Autopilot object, right? So just to give you an example here, if I were to, let me make this larger here. If I were to, now that I'm authenticated, invoke a REST method, method get URI is https graph.microsoft.com beta. Device management is the Intune node, and Windows Autopilot device identities is the Autopilot one. So I'll pass our headers in. Okay, so you can see there's 19 things in there, right? So if I were to now take this and store it in a variable, so let's say Autopilot devices equals invoke REST method, and now I go crack their value open, I'm given an array of data basically. This is all the JSON in the graph. These are all my Autopilot objects, and you can see one of the attributes is the serial number. So this is how we can, so we should be able to take the serial number of the device that we just got and find the corresponding Autopilot attribute, and we do that by filtering. So let's go ahead and move this here, and let's say, okay, so the Autopilot object will be invoke REST method. The method is get. The URI is https graph.microsoft.com/beta/device management. You'll be graph experts by the end of this. Windows Autopilot device identities. Okay, so that'll give us everything, but we don't want everything. We want a filter. So to filter, it's a question $filter. Problem is, we're in PowerShell. PowerShell will see that dollar and think it's a variable. So between question and dollar, you need to add this tick. It's basically the key to the left of your one key on the keyboard. If you hit shift in that key, it would be the tilde key, but we're just adding that tick. So question tick $filter, and we're going to filter for the object that contains the serial number. And what do we want the serial number to be? We want it to be our variable, because we just got the serial number. And I believe that needs to be in some kind of quotes, single quotes for that. So what we're saying here is get all those objects, but specifically find the one where the serial number matches the serial of this device. Okay, and in order to authenticate, we add our headers here. Great, so that'll be what allows us to make that call. Let's go ahead and run that. Oh, missing a closed parentheses right there. So that'll get you. Let's run that again. All right, now we're cooking. So if we call that object, we only got one, which is good, not the 19. If I crack that open, there we go, 5608. This is the object with our serial number. So we want to get the ID, and we want to get the group tag. So to do that, all we have to do is Autopilot ID equals Autopilot object dot value, specifically the ID. And we can write that out, right host. Autopilot ID is Autopilot ID. And now we'll get the group tag. So group tag equals Autopilot object dot value dot group tag. Yeah, they just call it group tag. Let's write that out. Right host. Autopilot. I would just say group tag. Group tag is group tag. Great. All right, let's write those out and see what that looks like. Okay, so you can see Autopilot ID is, and we got the ID, and the group tag is M365. Beautiful. We're going to do the same thing for the Intune object. Now, in that case, we only need the Intune. We only need the Intune ID. So we're just going to basically take the same idea. Now, in this part, if you want to go ahead and copy a bulk of that, you can get Intune info. So we need an Intune object. And then we're going to need the Intune ID. So let's do this. Intune object. We can take pretty much the whole thing because we're still going to filter by serial number. Okay. And we're just going to put that here. The only difference is it's not Windows Autopilot device identities. The node is going to be managed devices. The filtering's the same. And then this would be the same logic. So it would be Intune object.value.id. And we'll write that out. Right host will be Intune device ID is Intune ID. Okay, let's run that and see what the output is. Beautiful. Intune device ID is 43DA, and we can verify that if we go back to the desktop. 43DA97. 43DA97. So that's the ID, and we were able to get that just from the device. Okay. Last piece of information we're going to get is we're going to get the current user information. Get current user info. And this is pretty important. So what we want, because we're signed in as a user called Rick Jones, make up names. So we want to be able to get that information about this current, we want that username. Problem is we're running a system. So how do we do that? So we have a good method for that. So we call it the active username. And for that, we just run a get WMI object, Win32 computer system. We're going to go ahead and select the object, username. So now we have two things out of that. The first is the user, which is where we take the active username and replace the kind of the domain name in there. Then we can write that out. Right host, current active user is user. And that should give us what we want. Let's run that and see what happens. Yep, Rick Jones. So if I call user, that's Rick Jones. If I call active username, you're going to see Azure AD Rick Jones. So both of those can come in handy if we want them to. So we were able to get them as the system. All right, so we got through grabbing some basic device info, getting the graph info to correspond to it, and capturing that as part of our pre-migration process. We're going to do a little bit more of the script next time because it's somewhat large. Later.